Okay, let's continue. For those uninitiated wishing to start to explore Doris Wishman's filmography, which ones, let's say three or five movies, and in what order would you recommend to watch those movies? Which movies there will be?
Sure. The first movie by Doris that I ever saw was Bad Girls Go to Hell, and it's still, I think, one of her most powerful and successful films. So that would be one that I absolutely recommend. A classic mid-60s exploitation movie and a great Doris Wishman film. I think people will see the merits when they see that one. Then if you want to backtrack a little bit to see some of her earlier work in the nudist camp genre,
Hmm.
and she made like 8 films in that genre. She was like the most prolific nudist camp film producer in history. Um, you might want to check out like Blaze Star Goes Nudist. It's kind of fun. Blaze Star was a well-known stripper in America in the 1950s. Doris almost never worked with well-known people, but there's that. There's the fact that Blaze Star stars in the film. Also, it's just a very nice example of Doris's style. You know, she had already worked out this unique style I discussed earlier
Hmm.
during the nudist period. I think people will. I think people will enjoy it. And then, she continued into the 1970s when porno came along. She really didn't want to transition into hardcore porn. She wasn't comfortable with that. Um, she was already around 60 years old by this
Yeah,
time, by the way. Um, uh, but she tried to think of different gimmicks she could use to stay relevant in a market that had come very quickly to be dominated by explicit sex films. So she made a couple of movies with another famous American stripper named Chesty Morgan. Uh, although I say Chesty was American, she was American, but she actually was born in Europe. She's European.
yep.
And Doris
Here,
made
here,
two
they,
movies.
here, they, here they are.
There you go. She made 2 movies with her, Deadly Weapons and Double Agent 73.
Yes.
And I would say either of them would be a perfectly delightful way to see how Doris negotiates things like the terrible color schemes of the 1970s, and the terrible styles, clothing styles, whatnot. Her her style itself, though, her own style doesn't change significantly. It really endures throughout her career. So you'll see very stylistically similar things in those 3 films. She made a kind of a documentary movie, and it really is a documentary, but she didn't have any rigorous theories about documentary objectivity, you know what I mean? So there are contrived sequences in the film, and she even cuts in footage from some of her fictional films, but she made a movie called Let Me Die a Woman.
That's actually quite important, yes.
Very long and curious history. She actually made that movie over twice, and it was released 2 different times in different forms under different titles, but most people find that extremely engaging. It ostensibly documented the emerging phenomena of what was called transsexualism at the time. People use the term transgender now normally, but the term transsexual was used then.
Yes, it was.
And I won't say much more about it, but it's a shockingly strange film in many ways, but also, and I've spoken with transgendered people about this some years ago, it legitimately represents some people who were significantly involved in the transgender community around New York in the late 60s, early 70s. That was the first real clear movement around trans identity or whatever. But
Hmm.
Doris does her own strange stuff to it because she has no real clear sense of objectively representing people's lives. So, for instance, she actually has a transgendered woman who was known as Deborah Harton, who actually did a lot of newspaper interviews and stuff. She was a public figure. Her identity and what she had gone through wasn't a secret. And she has her, being interviewed in the film. And then she has her in a fake stage softcore sex scene. Like in a porno movie.
Yeah.
So it's sort of fascinating as an artifact. And there's a rumor that there's actually medical footage of an actual surgical castration, folks, for those who like the strange and freakish and slightly horrifying. So there's that. And then the last thing I would mention, and it's accessible out there, is the last film that Doris really completed during her active career, which is a horror movie she was trying to make called A Night to Dismember.
Dismember, yes.
Which is a joke because there was a movie about the sinking of the ship, the Titanic, called A Night to Remember.
Yeah.
And so she used the
title. Play on words, yeah.
Dismember, yeah. And it's one of the most stylistically shocking, unpredictable films I've ever seen. And it's largely because it was composed literally out of bits and pieces of a movie that was probably destroyed or taken out of her hands at some point. And it's astonishing. So if you can find that, I recommend you watch it. If you think it's going to be anything like a normal horror movie with conventional special effects, just forget that. No. Forget that. It's like watching the most far out avant-garde film you've ever seen. It's really amazing. So those would be my immediate recommendations. And I think other people who like Doris's cinema would probably agree with them. I don't think there's anything too unusual in those suggestions.
Yeah, I think it's safe to add that one of the interesting aspect of the Night to Dismember is that it stars then famous porn star Samantha Fox in there. So
Samantha Fox was a well-known porn actress in New York, from what I call.
But not to be confused with the pop singer Samantha Fox.
No, not the British singer, but that Samantha Fox is not her real name, but she was a young woman who got involved in sex films in New York in what I call the second generation of New York hardcore. She wasn't part of the original crew, which started around 71, 72. And then there's kind of a changing of the guard in the late 70s, probably just simply as people get older.
Yeah.
They move on and do other things. But she was one of the biggest names in the second generation, and she was trying to get out of pornography work, wanted to go into other types of films, and horror was just really reemerging as a noteworthy genre around that time. You think of Halloween and those kind of movies.
Yes.
So Doris Wishman, Roberta Findlay, about whom we spoke earlier, Andy Milligan, they all transitioned into making horror films.
Yes.
And probably largely because the porno market, was so oversaturated so quickly. It was pretty easy to shoot people having sex. It didn't take any real talent, and it didn't take much more than one light and one working camera. So it was easy to crank out sex films. So anybody who made more complicated films had an incentive to get out of that genre because it was very unrewarding. And the pay per film went down and down and down because they could be made so cheaply. So there was a good motive to get out of sex films. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's, it's an amazing film.
Okay, we already mentioned that you are official biographer of Doris Wishman, and you're working on the official biography, a book, and you mentioned that it's in the work like 30 years now.
30 years.
Yeah, and I know that there was a couple of dates which should be already released, but the world is still waiting for it. And can you tell us why is that? Why so, you're adding new materials, or, still talking to people, or do you have any approximate date you want to get it released, or still waiting for something?
Yeah, I am. This is going to sound crazy because I've been working on this one project for 30 years, but I'm about to tell you that I'm trying to finish another project before I finish my Doris book. So I'm deeply involved in another project that I will get finished in the next year, and it's moving along very quickly. Mm-hmm. So it probably won't be until next year, 2026, that I sit down and get the Doris book together, but I will finally get it together. And to answer your question, there were different reasons why I set the project aside at different times. I certainly have not been working on it continuously for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Worked on it in chunks in the late 90s, and then in chunks in the early 2000s. And then about 10 years ago, I went back and did a lot of other work and added to it. And irregularly over time, all sorts of new things are coming up that will factor into the final product. So it was an irregular project. I would say that I didn't complete it years ago because I wasn't entirely sure what the book should feel like or
Mm-hmm.
what it should say. That might sound crazy from somebody who sort of knows everything that you can know about Doris Wishman. At least I probably know more than anybody else. Let's put it that way. But it's tricky in some ways to represent Doris in the ways I've attempted to do so in the past. But having said that, I did along the way earn a doctoral degree by writing a portion of the book,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm fairly happy with. And so I will be rewriting that for my published version of the book, but I've got a good foundation there, and I think I finally found a way to, what we call a voice. I finally found a voice that I felt was appropriate. So to answer your question, it's taken way too long, but every time I sat down and said, I'm going to get it done now, I opened up a whole new tranche of research and found all sorts of new things that I had not found the previous time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm delighted in some ways that I never published it before because it would be a much less complete work if I had done so. And the internet over years has greatly facilitated this process. Don't forget, when I started this project, the internet had literally only just begun. I was going to public libraries trying to find resources. I mean,
Oh my God, yeah.
and trying to find people before the internet was very challenging. Getting old phone books out of the library and stuff like that. So the internet has regularly yielded new and interesting leads and new and interesting information. And I'm going to make a commitment to myself and to everybody to get it done next year. And I intend to self-publish it, by the way, which is another long-term project of mine to start my own little publishing concern, which is called Retrographica Press. So I will be publishing the book as well when I finish it, which I always felt was the best thing to do. So that, if that answers your question, it's gone on way too long from a certain point of view, and it's ridiculous that it's not done. But I'm not unhappy about it because I literally have found people that I never spoke with before, information I never had before, and corrected major errors that I would have made if I had published it 10 years ago. I'm really glad I didn't.
Fingers crossed for next year then.
Yes, it would be. Well, it's really the next project on my plate after this one, and I have certain reasons having to do with finance that are compelling me to get these things out there finally.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd like to get my Retrographica Press rolling and start that as a continuing business moving forward. And it's time to do that. So that's very motivating to say, okay, Doris has to get finished as well. And I have some other book projects to work on after that as well.
Okay, so we will move into another sexploitation legend, and we already mentioned the gentleman's name, and we basically cannot afford not to mention him. It was Joe Sarno.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be completely honest, I know only a few titles of his. I never watched Joe Sarno's movies, so you're gonna do the talking here again because
that's fine.
Yeah. So how did you meet him? How did you
Sure.
what was he like, and what about his movies? How did you find his movies?
Yeah, as you already know, I knew Joe quite well the last several years of his life as well. I met him because he had worked with some people, actresses and actors who had worked with Doris Wishman also. And I was trying to get some more information about them. And I had only seen a few of his films at the time I approached him as well. But I met with him personally in his apartment. He was a delightful, wonderful, friendly guy, like the coolest grandfather that you ever had by the time I had met him. And I just liked him and his wife so much, who became his partner in the mid to late 60s in filmmaking, that I just realized that I needed to begin to document his career like I had been trying to do with Doris. Don't forget, when I met these people, they were all really getting older.
Yes.
Like we're talking people in their 70s and 80s. And it was not invisible to me to recognize that a lot of them would not be around 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So while I was working on my doctoral dissertation about Doris Wishman, I stretched that process out several years so that I could secretly research Joe Sarno during that period without losing my funding for my college program where I was supposed to be writing about Doris Wishman, right? But it was obviously the right thing to do. And Joe, of course, you've only seen a few of his movies, but Joe is probably the most prolific sexploitation director in history. If you include the porno films that he made in the 70s and 80s, because he did transition into hardcore porn, he wrote and directed at least 75 feature movies. 75. It's an extraordinary accomplishment in its own right.
Yes.
You know? And he wrote the script for every one of them. So you want to talk about a kind of an auteur filmmaker who totally controls the project, and then who also, as I said earlier, contrived his own unique way of putting images together and of adding sound to them. They're very distinctive. So I'm so glad that I did that research, and I'm grateful for the fact that I was accepted by Joe and his family as his biographer. So in light of the question you asked me about finishing my Doris book, that would be the book after that I really have to sit down and finish. Although I will confess to you, I still have dozens and dozens of audio taped interviews that need to be transcribed from that project, some of them 15 years old, dozens of them. I mean, many were, but there are still many that haven't been transcribed. So I'll need to sit down and complete that project, but I'm kind of hoping that the so-called AI, artificial intelligence revolution, will make transcribing a lot easier than it used to be, where I used to have to sit down. I was even hiring people because I'm such a bad typist. But that will be another book that Retrographica Press will release. And I made a commitment to Joe to write that book. There is, by the way, another film scholar currently working on a book about Joe, which I'm very happy about. He didn't do all that kind of preliminary documentary research I did, interviewing people who worked with Joe and all that stuff. But he's got a great sense for cinema and for what's good about movies. So I think it'll be a wonderful, like a survey of Joe's life, but a lot of intelligent analysis of Joe's films.
Different take on that, yeah.
I'm the first to admit that it's not my first talent to analyze films in written form. I'm not too bad at talking about them verbally, but it's very hard for me to kind of squeeze my thoughts into clear sentences when I'm trying to do that. So I'm glad this other book will be. It's also in the writing phase. You know, I don't know when it will be completed, but it will be great to think that there will be a couple of thoughtful books about Joe Sarno coming out in the next 3 or 4 years. He really deserves it, and he was a wonderful guy. I mean, personally felt very close to him, as I did to Doris. And his cinema, his films deserve to be much better known.
Yes, we were already discussing that subject for the next question, but just briefly, what's that you find fascinating about Joe Sarno's movie?
Yeah, I mean, mostly again for the same.
We were talking about the different light and different angles of the camera. Yeah.
Just to reiterate, he's a stylistically unique auteur director with no film school training. He had a background in writing, and more like commercial writing and fictional writing. And he wrote a screenplay for a film and sort of co-directed it. You know, was there every day while they were shooting it. And the guy credited as the director of the film actually told me, he's dead now, told me that Joe really did co-direct it with him. and he just developed a passion for filmmaking. And he was such a disciplined filmmaker with such a clear vision of how he wanted the movie to look that he could make his films very quickly, very economically, because he knew exactly what shots he wanted. He would put them right in the script.
Mm-hmm.
He would get most things done like in one take. He could shoot a whole feature film on a weekend and it feels professional. I don't mean fancy. It doesn't feel like there's any money. It feels like a low budget movie, but very professionally done. He worked with a crew in the mid to late 60s. He used the same cameraman, the same editors, the same lighting. So he had a consistent crew he worked with. He would even work with some of the same actors for a series of films because he liked what they did. So he would write a script with the notion that I'll use this actress for this character, this actor for that character.
Yeah.
And then he would kind of weave together different situations. He also had certain personal obsessions that are interesting that you see in his films. He was deeply interested in female sexuality, how powerful women were sexually, which is very different from a lot of porn where the women are just objectified and the men use them for their sexual pleasure. This is all about how women, they kind of wield sexual power.
Mm-hmm.
He also was sort of interested in, this is sort of a cult theme that runs through many of his films. Now, I never knew him to have the least interest in occult stuff as a person. Yeah. Not even astrology. He didn't ask you what your sign was, but he frequently made films that had strange occult resonances that I find interesting as well. Mm-hmm. And, just wonderful, low-key, that film noir kind of a look that he exploited beautifully. These were black and white movies. It lent itself to low-budget filmmaking because, you could just have a bed in the corner of a room and one or two lights, and you didn't need much of a set. But they look so powerful. And I think he worked with many very sincere people, both behind the camera and in front of the camera, who really gave their all to his films because Joe obviously really, really believed in what he was doing. Like, he had almost a kind of a power over people. He was so dedicated to his filmmaking. He made you believe it was the most important thing that you were doing if you got involved with that film. But a very pleasant, friendly, not some Svengali, very pleasant, friendly hug. He'd meet you once and shake your hand. The second time he met you, he'd hug you like he had known you his whole life, like you were his cousin, A terrific guy. I miss him dearly.
Okay.
As I do Doris, who was funny and crazy and spontaneous and a lot of fun to know as well.